The Science of Spiritual Awakening. Unlocking God's Divine Blueprint. The moment you begin watching this, something subtle is already happening inside your brain. Tiny electrical impulses are firing, neural pathways are lighting up, and your nervous system is making micro adjustments without you ever asking it to. This isn't mystical language. This is measurable science. And yet, what's unfolding goes far beyond biology, because hidden beneath the chemistry of your cells is a blueprint, ancient, precise, and intentional, that many scientists now admit looks eerily like design. Not random, not accidental, but purposeful. And the unsettling question is this: what if spiritual awakening isn't about belief at all, but about remembering something your body already knows? For centuries, people thought awakening was reserved for monks in caves, prophets on mountaintops, or mystics who renounced the world. But modern neuroscience has quietly dismantled that myth. Brain scans now reveal that moments people describe as divine connection activate the same regions responsible for identity, perception, and meaning. The part of your brain that answers the question, "Who am I?" is the same place that lights up during prayer, awe, deep love, and sudden realizations that change your life forever. That means awakening doesn't pull you away from reality. It pulls you deeper into it. And here's the unsettling part: your brain was built for this. Before you ever questioned existence, before language, before culture shaped your beliefs, your nervous system already had the capacity to perceive something greater than survival. Researchers have found that humans are neurologically wired to search for meaning even in chaos. When the world falls apart, the brain doesn't just panic, it looks for purpose. This is why people often awaken during loss, trauma, exhaustion, or moments when life strips away everything familiar. The collapse isn't the enemy, it's the trigger. Because when the mind can no longer rely on old stories, the deeper blueprint activates. Think about it. Why does silence feel uncomfortable at first, but peaceful once you stay long enough? Why does staring at the ocean slow your breath without effort? Why does music give you chills that feel almost holy? These aren't emotional accidents. They're biological responses pointing to something older than modern civilization. Your vagus nerve, which connects the brain to the heart and gut, responds to rhythm, stillness, and coherence. When those align, the nervous system exits survival mode and enters what scientists now call integrated awareness. Spiritual traditions have always called this awakening. Science just arrived late to the conversation. What's even more astonishing is that this blueprint doesn't activate through force. You can't hustle your way into awakening. You can't grind for enlightenment. The brain resists control but responds to surrender. Studies show that when people stop trying to fix themselves and instead observe their inner experience without judgment, brainwave patterns shift. Beta waves associated with stress decrease. Alpha and theta waves increase, the same frequencies linked to creativity, intuition, and deep insight. In other words, the less you chase awakening, the closer it gets. This is why moments of sudden clarity often happen in the shower, during a walk, or right before sleep. When the mind relaxes its grip, the deeper intelligence speaks. Ancient texts describe this as God whispering in the stillness. Neuroscience calls it default mode network recalibration. Different language, same event. Now here's where things become impossible to ignore. Children naturally live in this state. Their brains operate in slower, more receptive wave patterns. They experience time differently. They feel connected without effort. But as responsibilities, fear, and identity conditioning accumulate, the brain hardens into efficiency mode. Survival replaces wonder. Performance replaces presence. Awakening, then, isn't becoming something new. It's returning to what you were before the world taught you who to be. And this return often feels terrifying, because awakening dismantles illusions. It strips away identities you built for safety. Careers, labels, beliefs, even relationships may suddenly feel hollow. Not because they are wrong, but because they were never meant to be your foundation. The nervous system interprets this loss of identity as danger at first. This is why awakening can feel like anxiety, depression, or confusion before it feels like peace. But biologically, what's happening is integration. Old neural pathways are dissolving. New ones are forming. You are literally being rewired. What's remarkable is that this process mirrors something engineers recognize instantly. Systems evolve by breaking down inefficient structures. Software updates overwrite outdated code. Muscles tear before they grow stronger. The brain follows the same law. Spiritual awakening isn't chaos. It's optimization. And here's the part most people never hear. Awakening is not about escaping the world. It's about engaging it differently. Once the brain stops filtering reality through fear-based narratives, perception sharpens. Colors feel richer. Time feels fuller. Presence becomes natural. Compassion stops being forced. And meaning doesn't need to be hunted, it emerges. This is why people who awaken often say things like, "I don't know how to explain it, but everything feels aligned." That alignment is measurable coherence between heart rhythm, brain waves, and breath. When these systems synchronize, the body enters a state of energetic efficiency. Stress hormones drop. Immune function improves. Even gene expression shifts. Yes, your DNA responds to perception. Studies in epigenetics show that prolonged states of calm awareness can activate genes associated with healing and longevity. Ancient mystics called this divine favor. Biology calls it adaptive expression. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself this. If the body responds to awareness with healing, if the brain is designed to access deeper perception, and if surrender activates intelligence beyond conscious thought, then what exactly did we think spirituality was? Belief or alignment? This is where the idea of a divine blueprint stops sounding poetic and starts sounding logical. Because blueprints don't force buildings into shape. They guide construction. And your awakening doesn't override your humanity. It completes it. The most fascinating discovery is that awakening isn't rare. It's suppressed. Modern life keeps the nervous system in constant alert. Notifications, deadlines, noise, comparison. The brain never rests long enough to integrate. When stillness finally arrives, awareness floods in. This is why people report awakenings during retreats, illness, heartbreak, or burnout. The system finally slows down enough to hear itself. And once you glimpse it, even briefly, you can't unsee it. The realization that you are not your thoughts, not your fear, not your past, changes how the brain processes everything. You begin responding instead of reacting. observing instead of resisting. Life stops feeling like something happening to you and starts feeling like something unfolding through you. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. You choose differently. You speak differently. You listen more. And strangely, life begins meeting you halfway. Not magically, but logically. When perception aligns with reality, friction decreases. And maybe that's the deepest truth science is finally catching up to. Awakening isn't supernatural. It's supernatural. It's what happens when nature functions without distortion. So if you've ever felt like there's more to life than survival, more to you than roles and routines, more to existence than chance, you're not broken. You're responding to a signal that's been inside you since the beginning. A signal that activates not when you strive harder, but when you soften enough to listen. Because the blueprint was never lost. It was waiting. And the moment you realize that, nothing looks the same again. And from that moment forward, a quiet shift begins to ripple through everything you experience. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. You start noticing how your reactions slow down just enough for choice to appear. The pause between stimulus and response widens, and inside that pause, something intelligent moves. Neuroscientists describe this as increased prefrontal cortex engagement, where conscious regulation overrides instinctive impulse. Spiritual traditions have always described it differently, saying wisdom replaces fear. Different words, same phenomenon. You are no longer being dragged by life. You are participating in it. What's strange is how ordinary this feels once it starts. Awakening doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It shows up as clarity during chaos, steadiness during uncertainty, and an unshakable sense that even when answers are missing, direction is not. The mind stops demanding certainty and starts trusting process. And biologically, this trust changes everything. Cortisol levels decrease. Heart rhythm becomes coherent. Breathing deepens without effort. The body begins operating as if it finally received the instructions it was waiting for. You begin to realize that many of your old struggles weren't personal failures, but nervous system patterns learned for survival. Hypervigilance, overthinking, people-pleasing, perfectionism, these weren't character flaws. They were adaptations. And awakening isn't about shaming those patterns. It's about thanking them for keeping you alive, then gently letting them retire. The brain is remarkably willing to cooperate when it feels safe. Safety, it turns out, is the gateway to transformation. This is why love plays such a critical role in awakening. Not romantic fantasy, but the felt experience of being accepted without performance. When the brain senses unconditional acceptance, the amygdala, the fear center, relaxes. Defensive filters drop. Perception widens. This is why people often describe divine encounters as overwhelming love rather than overwhelming power. Love isn't sentimental. It's neurological permission to expand. And suddenly, questions you've carried for years begin answering themselves without words. You understand why some doors closed, why certain relationships fell apart, why paths you wanted desperately never materialized. Not as punishment, not as randomness, but as redirection. The brain integrates past experiences into a coherent narrative, a process psychologists call meaning-making. Spiritually, this feels like divine orchestration. You stop replaying the past because it finally makes sense. What follows is not constant happiness. Awakening doesn't erase pain. It changes your relationship to it. Emotions move through you instead of defining you. Sadness becomes information, not identity. Fear becomes a signal, not a command. Joy becomes spacious, not desperate. The nervous system learns resilience instead of resistance. You bend without breaking, and something even more unexpected happens. Your sense of time changes. You become less rushed, even when busy. Moments feel fuller. Presence thickens experience. Studies show that when attention stabilizes, the brain encodes memories more richly. This is why awakened awareness feels like life slowing down. You're not living longer, you're living deeper. You may notice your desires shifting too. External validation loses its grip. Status feels hollow. Noise feels heavy. You crave simplicity, authenticity, and alignment. This isn't withdrawal from ambition. It's refinement of intention. You start asking better questions. Not, how do I get more? But what actually matters? And once that question lands, everything reorganizes around it. This is where the idea of God's divine blueprint becomes profoundly practical. Not as a distant authority imposing rules, but as an intelligence expressing itself through coherence, order, and growth. When you align with it, life flows with less friction. When you resist it, tension builds. Not because you're being punished, but because misalignment always creates strain. Just like forcing a machine to operate against its design causes wear and breakdown. And here's the quiet miracle most people overlook. Awakening doesn't isolate you from others. It deepens connection. Empathy becomes instinctual. You sense unspoken emotions. You listen beneath words. Mirror neurons in the brain activate more readily, allowing you to feel with others rather than against them. Compassion stops being an effort. It becomes a reflex. This is why awakened individuals often become stabilizing presences in chaotic environments. Not because they control outcomes, but because their nervous systems model regulation. Calm is contagious. Coherence spreads. Your inner state begins influencing rooms without a single word spoken. Ancient traditions called this carrying light. Modern science calls it interpersonal resonance. And perhaps the most humbling realization of all begins to surface. Awakening isn't about becoming special. It's about becoming available. Available to truth. Available to love. Available to reality as it is, not as fear distorts it. You stop trying to stand above life and learn how to stand within it. At some point, you may even laugh at how hard you once tried to fix yourself. How convinced you were that something was missing, because now it's obvious. Nothing essential was ever broken. The signal was always present. The noise just had to quiet down enough for you to hear it. And the irony is this: the more ordinary life becomes, the more sacred it feels. Washing dishes, walking outside, breathing, listening. Existence itself starts carrying weight and meaning, not because it changed, but because you did. So if you feel drawn to this understanding, not intellectually but viscerally, trust that pull. Curiosity is not random. Longing is not accidental. The same intelligence that formed galaxies encoded awareness into you. An awakening is simply the moment you stop arguing with it. Not the end of the journey, but the moment you finally realize you were never lost. And once that realization settles in, something even quieter unfolds. You stop needing proof, not because questions disappear, but because certainty stops being required for peace. The mind learns how to coexist with mystery without anxiety. Neuroscience calls this tolerance for ambiguity a marker of cognitive maturity. Spiritually, it feels like faith without effort. You don't cling to explanations anymore. You rest inside experience. Life keeps happening, of course.
Bill arrive.
People disappoint you. Plans fall apart. But there's a noticeable difference now. Events no longer collapse your sense of self. They pass through you like weather instead of defining the climate of your inner world. The nervous system recovers faster. Emotional recovery time shortens. Resilience becomes embodied, not aspirational. You may notice that intuition sharpens. Decisions feel clearer, not because outcomes are guaranteed, but because alignment feels unmistakable. This isn't superstition. When the brain quiets compulsive thinking, subtle pattern recognition improves. You pick up signals you once ignored. Tone shifts, timing, inner nudges. What people call divine guidance often arrives as calm clarity, not dramatic instruction. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you stop trying to control outcomes. Not from defeat, but from trust. Control dissolves when understanding deepens. You realize how much energy was wasted resisting what was already shaping you. Surrender no longer feels like loss. It feels like efficiency. There's a moment when you recognize that awakening doesn't make you separate from others. It reveals how deeply connected you've always been. The boundaries between me and world soften. You understand that what you contribute internally affects what you encounter externally. Your state becomes your signal. Your presence becomes your offering. This is where service emerges naturally. Not obligation, not sacrifice, but expression. You want to contribute because you feel full, not because you feel guilty. Giving stops depleting you. It energizes you. Studies show that altruistic behavior activates reward centers in the brain more consistently than self-centered pleasure. Spiritual traditions have always known this. Fulfillment follows alignment. Even suffering begins to look different. You don't romanticize it. You don't seek it. But you no longer see it as meaningless. Pain becomes a teacher, not a sentence. It shows you where attachment still lives, where fear still grips. And instead of running from that information, you listen. Growth accelerates when resistance dissolves. What's remarkable is how ordinary your life may look from the outside while feeling radically different on the inside. There's no costume, no title, no announcement. Awakening doesn't make you louder. It makes you steadier. And steadiness, in a chaotic world, is rare. You begin trusting silence more than noise, depth more than speed, truth more than comfort. And paradoxically, life feels lighter, less burdened by the need to perform or prove. You show up as you are, not as who you think you should be. At some point, you realize that awakening isn't something you maintain. It maintains you. The intelligence you aligned with keeps correcting course, gently, repeatedly, without force. You drift. You notice. You return, over and over again, not perfectly, but honestly, and perhaps the most freeing realization of all finally lands. There is nowhere else you need to get to. No future version of you that holds permission for peace. No milestone that unlocks worthiness. The divine blueprint was never about becoming someone else. It was about becoming present. This is why awakening feels less like climbing a mountain and more like exhaling after holding your breath for years. You didn't gain something extraordinary. You released what was blocking what was already there. And from that place, life doesn't become easier, but it becomes truer. And truth, once felt, cannot be unfelt. So if something inside you resonates as you hear these words, trust it. Not because this is the final answer, but because it's the right direction. The path doesn't demand perfection. It invites honesty, and the invitation never expires. And as that invitation stays open, you begin to recognize how gently life has been guiding you all along. Moments that once felt random start revealing patterns. Conversations arrive exactly when you need them. Books, ideas, even delays appear with an almost unsettling precision. Not because the universe is conspiring in a magical sense, but because your perception has shifted. You are finally seeing what was always there. You stop rushing experiences. You allow moments to finish before reaching for the next one. The brain, no longer overloaded with anticipation, processes reality more cleanly. This is why presence feels nourishing. It feeds parts of you that constant stimulation never could. You're not escaping life anymore, you're digesting it. And there's a deep humility that comes with this stage. You realize how little control you ever truly had, and strangely, how little control you actually needed. The weight of personal authorship softens. You still act, still choose, still create, but without the strain of forcing outcomes. Effort remains, but friction dissolves. You may notice that your relationship with fear evolves. Fear doesn't vanish. It becomes transparent. You see it for what it is, information without authority. The body still responds, but the mind no longer obeys automatically. Courage stops being loud. It becomes quiet consistency. There's also a new tenderness toward yourself. Old judgments lose their bite. You understand that every version of you was doing the best it could with the awareness it had. Regret transforms into gratitude. Even mistakes start looking like necessary detours rather than wasted time. And perhaps one of the most profound shifts is this: you stop trying to convince others. Awakening removes the urge to evangelize truth. You understand that insight ripens differently in everyone. You share when invited. You listen more than you speak. Your life becomes the message, not your words. The world doesn't suddenly agree with you. Conflict doesn't disappear. But your inner world stops being held hostage by external conditions. You become internally referenced, grounded, stable, free in a way that doesn't depend on circumstances aligning perfectly. Over time, you realize that awakening isn't a peak experience. It's a baseline shift. The drama fades. The fireworks quiet down. What remains is clarity, steadiness, and a sense of being at home within yourself. This is the part few people talk about because it's not flashy, but it's where real peace lives. And quietly, without fanfare, you begin to trust life again. Not naively, wisely. You trust that whatever unfolds will be workable, meaningful, and survivable. That trust becomes your foundation. So if you're still listening, still present, still curious, know this: you're not chasing something distant. You're aligning with something intimate, something patient, something that has been waiting beneath the noise. And the moment you realize that, the search ends, not because there's nothing more to discover, but because you finally understand where discovery begins. And from that place of understanding, life begins to feel less like a problem to solve and more like a conversation to participate in. You stop interrogating every moment for meaning, because meaning starts revealing itself naturally. You realize that clarity doesn't always arrive as answers. Sometimes it arrives as peace in the absence of answers, and that peace feels earned, not given. You become more patient with unfolding. You no longer rush transformation or judge yourself for not being there yet. Time stops feeling like an enemy. It becomes a collaborator. You sense that growth has its own intelligence, its own rhythm, and forcing it only creates distortion. Just as the body heals best when supported rather than rushed, awareness deepens when trusted rather than chased. There's also a subtle shift in how you experience success and failure. Success no longer defines your worth, and failure no longer threatens it. You engage fully, but you're not consumed by outcomes. The nervous system stays regulated even in uncertainty. This is where freedom actually lives, not in control, but in adaptability. You start to notice how often the mind once tried to predict the future out of fear. Now, prediction loosens its grip. You plan when needed, but you're no longer imprisoned by anticipation. The present moment becomes sufficient, not perfect, but enough, and something quietly miraculous happens. Gratitude begins to surface without effort, not forced positivity, but genuine appreciation for simple existence. Breath, warmth, movement, connection. The brain, no longer fixated on threat, becomes sensitive to goodness. You don't ignore pain, but you stop missing beauty. Your relationship with effort changes too. You still work, still strive, still create, but from alignment instead of anxiety. Action feels cleaner. Motivation feels intrinsic. Burnout loses its hold because your energy is no longer leaking through resistance. There's also a growing trust in your own inner compass. You stop outsourcing authority over your life. Opinions matter less. Approval loses its addictive pull. You listen inward first, then engage outwardly. This isn't arrogance. It's coherence. And as coherence stabilizes, life begins reflecting it back. Relationships either deepen or gently fall away. Environments shift,
Opportunities align.
not magically but naturally. Systems tend toward balance when interference is removed. Eventually, you realize that awakening didn't add something extraordinary to your life. It removed what was unnecessary. The noise, the tension, the self-betrayal. What remains is simple, clear, and surprisingly strong. You don't feel the need to label yourself awakened. You don't measure progress. You live. You respond. You remain open. And openness becomes your greatest strength. Because at the deepest level, awakening isn't about transcendence. It's about intimacy. Intimacy with reality, with truth, with yourself. And once you touch that intimacy, even briefly, it changes how you walk through the world forever. And as you walk with that intimacy, you begin to sense how deeply life responds to sincerity. Not effort, not performance, but honesty. When your inner world aligns with what you express, tension dissolves. You say yes when you mean yes. You say no without guilt. Integrity stops being a moral concept and becomes a physiological relief. The body relaxes when you stop betraying yourself. You notice how much of your former exhaustion came from fragmentation. Thinking one thing, feeling another, doing something else entirely. Awakening brings these layers into agreement. Thought, emotion, and action begin speaking the same language. The result isn't perfection, it's coherence. And coherence feels powerful in a way force never could. You may still encounter moments of doubt. Old patterns don't vanish overnight. But now doubt doesn't spiral, passes. You recognize it as weather, not truth. You don't fight it or feed it. You let it move through, trusting that clarity follows openness more reliably than control. There's also a new relationship with stillness. Silence no longer feels empty, feels full. You realize how much wisdom emerges when nothing is being added. The mind stops constantly narrating, and awareness steps forward. This is where insight arrives, not as loud revelation, but as quiet knowing. And gradually, compassion deepens in ways you didn't anticipate. You stop seeing people as problems to fix or obstacles to navigate. You begin seeing nervous systems responding to their own conditioning, their own fears, their own stories. Judgment softens. Understanding widens. You don't excuse harm, but you understand its roots. This understanding frees you from carrying resentment that was never serving you. The world still contains chaos. Injustice still exists. Pain doesn't disappear, but you no longer collapse under the weight of it. You engage where you can, contribute where you're called, and release what isn't yours to carry. Discernment replaces overwhelm, and something subtle yet profound happens to your sense of purpose. It stops feeling like a single destination or calling you must discover. Purpose becomes how you show up to whatever is in front of you, with presence, honesty, and care. The question shifts from, what am I meant to do with my life? To, how am I being with my life right now? That shift changes everything. You realize that the divine blueprint was never about control, certainty, or perfection. It was about alignment, about living in rhythm rather than resistance, about allowing intelligence, greater than fear, greater than ego, to move through you. And maybe the most surprising realization of all is how gentle this intelligence is. It doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't rush you. It waits patiently until you're ready to listen. So if you find yourself here, still engaged, still curious, still feeling something resonate beneath the words, trust that. Not because you need to believe anything, but because awareness recognizes itself. Truth doesn't need persuasion. It only needs space. And in that space, life continues not as something to conquer, but as something to participate in fully. That participation is the awakening. And as everything settles into this deeper understanding, something gentle but powerful becomes clear. Awakening was never meant to pull you away from the world or make you feel above it. It was meant to bring you back into life with open eyes and an open heart, to help you live awake inside ordinary moments, to remind you that meaning is not hidden somewhere far away, but woven into every breath you take when you are fully present. You don't need to rush this. You don't need to compare your journey to anyone else's. Awareness unfolds at the pace your nervous system can hold. Growth is not a race. It's a relationship. And the more patient you are with yourself, the more deeply this understanding integrates into who you are becoming. If this message found you at a moment when you needed clarity, stillness, or reassurance, let that be enough for now. You don't have to remember every word. What matters is the feeling it leaves behind. The quiet sense that you are not broken, that you are not late, that something intelligent and loving has been guiding you even when it didn't feel that way. And if this resonated, if even one sentence made you pause, reflect, or feel understood, then you're not alone here. This channel exists for people who are questioning deeply, growing consciously, and learning how to live with awareness in a noisy world. Every video you watch here is created to help you slow down, see clearly, and reconnect with what truly matters. So if you felt value in this, take a moment to like this video. Not for the algorithm alone, but because it helps this message reach others who may be silently searching for the same clarity you just experienced. Share it with someone who feels overwhelmed, disconnected, or curious about the deeper layers of life. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss future explorations into consciousness, meaning, and inner growth. We're building something here, not just content, but a space for reflection, learning, and genuine connection. A place where growth feels grounded, awakening feels human, and understanding feels possible. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening with presence. And remember, nothing meaningful about you is missing. You are already becoming exactly what you were meant to be, one moment of awareness at a time.